Hi everybody, my name is James Boston. I'm the co-founder of Talking Wellbeing. On today's show, I'm joined by a very special guest, and her name is Jasdeep Mago. She's the co-founder of Invisible Illness and a certified neuropsychotherapist. She's here today to talk about anxiety, which is a topic that is really important as many people have experienced anxiety and would perhaps like to get an insight into how they can better understand anxiety and potentially deal with their anxiety. Welcome to the show, Jasdeep.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, anxiety is definitely one of my favorite topics. So I'm glad we're talking about that today.
Brilliant. So if you could start by telling the audience a bit about your background. Who are you? What's your story? And what made you interested in learning about anxiety?
I am a psychologist. I studied in Mumbai and then in India, and then from there went on to studying in the UK. And I did my neuropsych course there. Um, After returning from there, I think I went through a whole sort of um, you know, I think change in environment caused trauma in some way. And I had severe bouts of anxiety for a very long time. Along with that, like coupled depression for some amount of time. And of course, I was a practicing therapist, but it's very different to know something and to feel something. So I think the two sort of came together for me when I had my own bouts of anxiety, which I still battle with here and there. It's a lot better now, but I think my in-depth sort of uh, understanding and just interest in the topic of anxiety began when I started to realize and see patterns of it in myself. And I started to trace it back to when I was pretty young, actually, which obviously at the time there was no awareness. People around me didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was, obviously. I did not know what I was going through. So I think when I started to trace it back to something that happened when I was pretty young is when I started to get more interested in it to sort of understand that, people may be suffering from anxiety without really realizing what it is or realizing how to cope with it. And it's such a general problem, it's such a everyday, everybody deals with it kind of a concern. It's not something that is, dealt with only a certain amount of people. I think everyone at some point in their life has faced anxiety or might face anxiety. So I think that's what really got me interested in the topic of anxiety.
Thank you. So you're also the founder of Invisible Illness. So could you tell the audience, what was that journey to beginning Invisible Illness and what does Invisible Illness do?
Yeah, I completely skipped that out of my intro for some reason.
No worries.
Yeah, so Invisible Illness India is a mental health organization that we founded 3 years ago. Since then, when we founded it, it was just an act to sort of raise awareness around mental health concerns and suicide prevention. From there, we sort of grew and started to work on like public awareness platforms with events, webinars, seminars. That moved on to working with corporates, with schools and other institutions. We also started targeting like individuals who cannot afford mental health services. So we opened a subsidized mental health clinic for them. We also have a support group which is free of charge for young adults with mental illnesses. So overall, with our verticals of our company, we sort of try to target as much as we can with raising awareness, providing reliable solutions, on various sort of platforms, which is, on a corporate level, on an institutional school level, or a one-on-one level. So that's sort of how we work.
Brilliant. So let's get moving in terms of anxiety. Let's really sort of, engage our audience here. So first question, what is anxiety?
um, so if you have to imagine it, it is basically the feeling of losing control or not being in control. It's physically, it feels like tremors, rapid heart rate, palpitations, sweating, um, feeling like there's tightness in your chest, feeling short in breath, like there's shortness of breath, you're not being able to breathe properly, not being able to focus on anything. So physically, that's what it feels like. Mentally, it sort of feels like the worst thing is going to happen and I have no control over it. And those thoughts begin from one thought and then move to like can reach up to like a million thoughts at that point, which can go from just I don't know what's going to happen. I might fail my exam to I'm definitely going to fail my exam to I've already failed to what my future is going to look like. It just spirals out of control, and that cycle keeps moving till you sort of break that chain. So it's like rumination of thoughts with overthinking of the same concern, and always the concern is about the worst case scenario, like what is the worst thing that can happen and how all of that is not in my control. So it anxiety is basically the feeling of not being in control, and physically it manifests in various ways. It can also cause nausea, it can cause headaches, it can cause irritable bowel syndrome, it can trigger just it can trigger a lot of allergic reactions also in some people. It happens. That's sort of rare, but the more common symptoms I already sort of know, spoke about. So yeah, that's what anxiety is primarily.
And how did it affect you personally?
Sorry?
And how did anxiety affect you personally?
If me, I think when I was hit with anxiety, the first thing I sort of noticed was that I wasn't able to sleep. I would have a lot of ruminating thoughts, a lot of overthinking, and that sort of used to, it's just the feeling of fear, like getting scared. Like imagine if your biggest fear is heights and you're standing on a really tall building and looking down, how would you feel? That's what it is, but constantly for a good amount of time. So I think for me, the first thing I sort of noticed was that I wasn't able to sleep. And then the second thing it moved to, I wasn't able to focus on anything. Like anytime anybody would bring up the concept of exams, for example, I would not be able to focus on what they're saying, but sort of my thoughts would start spiraling and thinking about the worst thing that would happen, how I'll fail, how I'll be a failure, how, my life will never reach anywhere, things, and it would just spiral. So, and more recently for me, anxiety has a more physical manifestation rather than a mental manifestation. So I know that I'm anxious only because I'll start to have really rapid heart rate, but mentally I'm fine. Like I'm not thinking about anything because I've sort of I've learned how to deal with it and cope with it mentally, but the physical manifestation still shows up. So it does cause like it will make my palms sweaty for no reason, and that's when I know that my physiologically and biologically my body is reacting to anxiety, but mentally I'm being able to cope with it. So it is coming out somewhere. But yeah, of course, it's very it is manageable. So for me personally, I think that's predominantly how it's been.
So what advice would you give, or better, what steps did you take to manage your anxiety?
So first things first, I think I needed to know that it was anxiety. So I needed to recognize it. So because until the point that I didn't know it was anxiety, I was treating it as just irrational fear. Like, like everybody in me and everybody around me, because of lack of awareness and knowledge, everyone was sort of treating it as just, oh, she's just really scared, she's a fearsome child, she's just generally gets scared of everything. So that's how it was treated. So I think if it wasn't treated with that outlook and it was treated with a more anxiety outlook, it would I think the approach towards it would be different, which is what happened the second time round when my anxiety sort of reappeared when I was a lot older, when I had completed my education. So when it did reappear, at that point I knew how to recognize it. I knew what it was. I knew how it manifested, and I recognized it almost immediately. And that sort of helped a lot because knowing what you have, some for most people, putting some kind of a, I would not want to say label, but for the lack of better words, putting some kind of a label on it really helps. It helps you feel like, okay, there is an answer. there is a solution, that it's not ambiguous, that it's not something that I don't know is taking over. At least I know what it is and I know how to approach it. So I think the first thing is to be aware of what you are going through. So I know that lots of people say don't read on the internet, etc. But I would just say be aware in general that these are possibilities that can happen and this is what it feels like. And if you aren't aware and you are feeling something, then speak to someone about it, because if you aren't, someone else might be aware and they might be able to guide you through it. Um, so for me, it began with that, and then I sort of moved on to um, just sort of finding my triggers. So to understand when, where, how am I being how is my anxiety being triggered? When does it when does it get really bad? When is it okay? Are there times that, like, is there something that I'm particularly doing? Is there someone I'm talking to? Is there a certain topic? And once I gathered those triggers, I sort of like started making thought journals, and I gathered those triggers through my thought journal. That every time X person showed up, I would have anxiety, even if that was, say, a family member. Every time I would sort of see that family member, I would have anxiety. So I started to understand that, okay, this person is a trigger. Then the next step was to understand that what is making this person a trigger, what in me is triggering that response. There must be some association. So if it was, just sort of initially when I was younger, it was the topic of marriage, which would sort of trigger a lot of anxiety in me. Like if someone would talk about marriage or bring up the topic of marriage, or would be discussing someone else's marriage, it would bring up a response of anxiety. And I started to pick up on that. I started to make associations. And even though I had made the association, I wasn't able to unassociate or change the association into a positive one myself, because you can't do everything on your own. That's when I sort of um, uh, seek help to understand that I have these triggers, and I know my triggers, but now I don't know what to do with it. So I needed guidance
Mm-hmm.
to resolve what was there between me and that trigger. So that was the next step that I took. And through therapy, it really helped me to learn a lot of skills in terms of um, what is making my association so negative, and how can I, sort of change that. And to understand that you don't always have to change the association. Sometimes you can even get away from the trigger, because sometimes the trigger is bigger than your thoughts. It's a real life threat, for someone who's going through PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that is. It's a real threat. Then it feels real. So I don't think then at times like that you can change the association, but you sometimes just need to eliminate the trigger completely. So if it's a toxic relationship, you need to eliminate that trigger completely that is causing that anxiety response within your body. But if it is something that is driven by, I am thinking, like the thought that the association your thought has made to that situation, then you can sort of change that thought and that belief behind it, which is what I did with marriage. So the concept of marriage was always, it always seemed really like forced, because in our culture it always seemed that way. So I always, the perception towards it was always that it's a punishment. So that over time I could resolve through my therapeutic sessions. That's just one example that I'm giving, like one minute example out of everything that was my trigger. Um, yeah, so I think that those are the steps, and there are a lot of like smaller coping strategies that you can do, because I did have panic attacks also. So there are a lot of smaller coping strategies that when a panic attack arises, what should you do? Because in that moment, it's not about the association. In that moment, it's just a physiological response. So I mean, we can talk about that if that's something that
Yeah, please,
you
please go
want to
ahead.
talk about.
No, that is brilliant. I was
Yeah.
going to talk about, also ask you about therapy. At what stage would you encourage somebody who is watching this and they've experienced anxiety perhaps for quite a long time? At what stage would you advise them to get therapy and seek that extra support?
That's a great question, because, like I said earlier, that anxiety is something that everyone goes through. So, at what point do you need help? And the line is literally uh, thinking that now my anxiety response is interfering with my everyday activities, like everyday daily life, like going to work, going to school, studying, making friends, talking to my colleagues, presenting at work, cooking food, getting on a video call, things like that. Like if it's interfering, if my anxiety's gotten to a point that it's now interfering with my everyday activities, like I'm not able to eat, I'm not able to sleep, I'm not able to get out of the house and go work out, things like that, then you know that it's come to a point that it's sort of disrupting your life, so you need to seek help. In any scenario, we say that anything that's disrupting your life, even if, say, if you're drinking, you drink every day, but if you're still functional, we don't call it a problem. As soon as you become dysfunctional is when we call it a problem and we call it an addiction. That's the same with any other condition. Your anxiety is normal, manageable, and you're coping with it until it is disrupting something and making your life dysfunctional. And that's when you seek help.
So that's a distinction between sort of anxiety and maybe feeling butterflies or feeling nervous about an exam to the feeling and those sensations actually affecting your capacity to function normally, so to speak. Would you say that's fair?
Perfectly correct. Yeah. And another thing that I want to sort of mention here is that anxiety is a normal physiological response. Like it's just how much of it is there is present at that given time. So, we generally, even in therapy, say that your anxiety is good for you. It's present because it's a survival instinct. It protects you from something unknown, something ambiguous, something that you can't control. It's a protective response that your body biologically has created within you. Um, but it is only dysfunctional when your anxiety, say, goes up, like, from, if I have to put it in percentage, if it's 40% on an everyday level, if it's gone up to 80, is when it probably is now interfering and it's making you too anxious to perform, say, in your exam, or perform at work, or just be functional in your house and talk to everybody and be social. So we generally, even in therapy, say that, your anxiety is good for you. Maintain 40% of it and discard 60% of it, and work with that 40%. Use it to fuel you. Use it as something that drives you, similar to stress. Like stress in good doses is really useful. It helps you to work better, faster, more productive, more efficient, more focused. Same with anxiety. It does all of that, but as soon as it crosses that sort of a line, is when it starts becoming dysfunctional, when you can't focus, when you can't sit, when you need to, like, get up and move around, and you're not able to um, just get it together and put your thoughts together, and all your thoughts are spiraling. That's when it's crossed that line. So nervousness is slightly different. Nervousness is, like, for example, if I have a fear of heights and I am now being told to jump out of a plane, I will have nervousness. That's I don't know if or if I'm standing on a really high building, I'll have nervousness, which is just butterflies in the stomach. It's a totally different response. It doesn't make your thoughts spiral to a level that I will slip and die for no reason. You don't have those random thoughts when you're nervous. You have butterflies. You barely have any thoughts. It's just sort of that feeling, that jittery feeling.
Okay, brilliant. So I want to talk about solutions now, and sort of practical ways that people may approach anxiety or approach their well-being. So here's a quick question for you. Can yoga help with anxiety?
Yes. And but having said that, I don't want to say that it's the only solution, because a lot of people, especially where I come from, a lot of people in India believe that yoga is like the end all be all solution. So no, that's not it. Yes, yoga helps because it's very it makes you focus on your breath a lot. It makes you be in the moment a lot. It brings you to an absolute awareness of where your body is in time and space. And that practice is what we call mindfulness. And mindfulness as a technique is a very useful technique for anxiety or any other mental health condition. Um, and even for general well-being, not just for mental health conditions. It's beneficial for even general well-being. So yes, yoga helps, but it's not the end-all be-all solution.
So would you say the same for meditation as well?
Yes. Also, the one thing I'd like to add with for meditation is that it's not easy for everyone to do, and especially if I have an anxiety condition that is sort of diagnosed and I'm taking treatment for, when you're told why don't you meditate, it's it's not the most practical solution to give someone who's suffering with anxiety, because it's not easy. It's not an easy practice to pick up. Meditation takes years to develop. It's a skill that takes years of practice. So it's not something that I can just, tell someone who has an extreme anxiety condition, why don't you go home and meditate? That person will probably sit to meditate, try to focus on their breath, and might have a panic attack because they're focusing that much on their breath. And that makes them realize that their breath is really fast. And this is something I've experienced personally, because this is what I was told. I was told that, you should meditate. And I said, okay, fine. I'll go home and I'll do a instrumental music meditation or something I was suggested. And the night I did it, I remember this like yesterday. I had a panic attack that night because it made me so aware of my breath that I started to realize that I'm now suddenly not in control of my breath also. And my breath started going really fast, very shallow breathing basically. And that made me supremely anxious, and I landed up having a panic attack that night. So it can have that effect. So because meditation is a learned skill and takes years and years and years. So I think that um, it's good to start slow. It's good to start with smaller steps rather than telling someone just meditate. I think it's better to guide them through the process of it one step at a time. But of course, it's very beneficial. It's been used for centuries. It's a technique that's been used for centuries, and it's definitely got its benefits.
So would you say that your our approach to well-being should be less about finding quick fixes and be more about sort of establishing a overall healthy lifestyle that encourages a sort of good well-being overall? Would you say that's a fair statement?
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I could not agree more. I think this is so one of the big topics that I talk about wherever I go is just essentials of mental well-being. And how it is, it's I say mental well-being because it's not only about people who are sick and people who have conditions, but it's about everyone. We all have stressors in our everyday life. We have fast-paced lives. We have social media. We have the internet. We have so many triggers. Even though we don't think they are triggers, we can read one sentence on the internet and our whole day can get ruined. So it is we are surrounded by constant triggers. So I think it's very, very essential to have a overall holistic approach on an everyday basis to take care of ourselves rather than wait for when things get really bad and then fix and then try to find quick fixes. So I
Mhm.
completely agree with you.
Okay, brilliant. And we will sort of wrap it up there. So could you tell everybody where they could find you and Invisible Illness on social media?
Surely. So you can find us on Instagram or at Invisible Illness IND. And you can find me as well. I have an open profile, Jasdeep Mago. On Instagram. We're there on all the other social media platforms as well, but Instagram is, I think, the most accessible. But we are also on Facebook and Twitter. And yeah, if you need any sort of resources to reach out to the right kind of help in a given city, in a given country, we are there to sort of provide that. And we also provide reliable solutions ourselves. So we won't only just redirect you, but we can also assist you ourselves. So yeah, happy to help whenever. So please reach out.
Okay, brilliant. No, you guys are producing some great content, and I think that everybody should go and follow you guys and enjoy that content as well. You can also follow us at Talking Wellbeing. We're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can also follow my own personal profile, which is at I am_James Boston. And I try and post a lot of sort of well-being content as well. You can view this podcast or this interview. It'll be up on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So make sure that you guys check it out. If you have any questions on anxiety for myself or Jasdeep, then you can leave them in the comment section or send either of us a message and we'll be happy to help. Hope that you enjoyed this, and we're signing out here. So I'll see you guys later and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
Thank you for watching.